October 31, 2007, New York City. A little-known banking analyst named Meredith Whitney sends out a research note that no one asked for. She works for CIBC World Markets, a mid-tier firm most traders barely watch. Her report is 4 pages long. It says Citigroup, the largest bank in America, is about to run out of money. Not literally broke, but dangerously undercapitalized because of mortgage assets sitting on its books that are worth far less than the bank admits. Whitney's conclusion is blunt. Citigroup will have to cut its dividend or raise emergency capital, maybe both. At the time, this sounds absurd. Citigroup has over $2 trillion in assets. Its CEO, Chuck Prince, had said just months earlier that as long as the music was playing, you had to get up and dance. Wall Street is still dancing. Then the note goes out. Within hours, Citigroup's stock drops more than 8%. The broader market follows, wiping out billions in value in a single session. Analysts scramble to explain who this woman even is. Whitney had built her career studying bank balance sheets line by line, the unglamorous work most Wall Street analysts skip in favor of headline numbers. She noticed something specific. Citigroup's capital ratios were thinner than they looked, propped up by assets tied to subprime mortgages that were losing value fast. She wasn't guessing. She had done the math. 3 days later, Chuck Prince resigns. 2 months after that, in January 2008, Citigroup does exactly what Whitney predicted. It slashes its dividend by 41% and announces a multi-billion-dollar capital infusion from foreign investors. Suddenly, the analyst nobody had heard of is the analyst everybody wants to hear from. Because of this call, Whitney becomes a fixture on financial television, a rare voice treated as more reliable than the banks themselves. Behind the scenes, though, the story is more complicated than one lucky note. Whitney had spent years inside the machinery, bank accounting, reading footnotes other analysts ignored. She understood that banks were carrying mortgage-backed securities at values that assumed housing prices would keep rising forever. When she ran the numbers assuming prices might fall instead, the capital cushions banks relied on essentially vanished. This wasn't a hunch about the economy. It was arithmetic, which meant that when the housing market did turn, the damage wasn't contained to subprime borrowers missing payments. It moved straight into the balance sheets of the biggest institutions in the country. By the summer of 2008, the pattern Whitney flagged in Citigroup was showing up everywhere. Bear Stearns collapses in March, sold for a fraction of its former value in a deal brokered by the Federal Reserve. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government-backed mortgage giants, are placed into conservatorship in September. Then, on September 15th, Lehman Brothers files for the largest bankruptcy in American history. Whitney's original warning, once dismissed as extreme, now looks conservative by comparison. Reporters begin calling her the woman who called the crash, a label she never fully embraces because she knows dozens of people inside the system had access to the same numbers. What set her apart was the willingness to publish the conclusion in public, on the record, before the consequences arrived. That willingness came with a cost. Bank executives were furious. Some accused her of talking down stocks she didn't understand, of causing panic rather than reporting facts. Others on Wall Street quietly agreed with her math, but stayed silent, worried about relationships with the very banks she was criticizing. Whitney kept publishing anyway. Through late 2007 and into 2008, she continued warning that major banks were understating losses tied to mortgage debt and continued to be right more often than she was wrong. Her name became shorthand for a specific kind of credibility. The analyst who wasn't afraid to say the largest banks in the country were in trouble before regulators would admit it. By early 2009, with the financial system in freefall and government bailouts reaching into the hundreds of billions of dollars, Whitney's October 2007 note was being taught as a case study. It showed that the crisis wasn't invisible. It was buried in filings and footnotes, available to anyone patient enough to read them. Then, riding that reputation, Whitney made a second, far bigger call. In late 2010, she went on national television and predicted a wave of municipal bond defaults. Dozens of cities and states unable to pay their debts within a year. This time, the prediction did not come true. The wave never materialized. Her reputation, built on one precise and devastating note, took a serious hit. Critics who had once dismissed her as reckless now had proof. Whitney's career never fully recovered its earlier shine. She left CIBC, launched her own firm, and eventually shut it down years later after a string of underperforming calls. The woman who had once moved markets with a single research note found that the same fame that made her a star made her failures louder too. Today, Meredith Whitney's story sits inside every finance class that studies 2008, but rarely in the way people expect. It isn't a story about a genius who always saw the future clearly. It's a story about what happens when someone reads the fine print everyone else skips, says what the numbers show, and gets it right exactly once, at exactly the right moment. The rest of the world remembers the moment. Few remember what came after.